Hello and welcome back to another OCR B Geography GCSE revision lesson. So this week we are looking at topic 2, which is changing climates. My last video focused on the evidence and the causes of climate change. This week we're going to be looking at the global impacts and the impacts of climate change on the UK. So again, today we just want to make sure we're picking out some key ideas, making sure we really understand this topic really well. So, as like I did last week, attached to your work this week, you've got a threshold concept grid. Those of you who haven't got this, you can see it on the slide. So you've got a few boxes here we need to fill in, but we want to try and fill these in quite a lot of detail. Okay, so you can see we've got boxes to look about the global impacts of the UK, also considering how climate change can be responsible for things like tropical storms, which I'll make a few points on as we go through the PowerPoint. And again, we've got a couple of exam questions there for you to kind of brainstorm, mind map and get a few ideas that you could write about for that question. We'll talk about that at the end of it. As like last week, I really suggest that you pause the video, try and complete as much as you can without watching the rest of this video. So with just a normal black pen, okay, just try and see how much you can do. If you've done that already and you're ready to move on, then maybe consider now that I'm going to show you some visual clues, and you can use a purple pen or a different coloured pen to try and fill in some gaps you had using the purple pen. And then if you're still stuck, we'll then go on to kind of the teacher support section as well, okay, where we'll be going through some ideas. So remember to pause as and when you need to, okay, and really try and push yourself to try and see how much you can remember. So here's your next pen. This is some visual clues. You can see there's a mind map in the middle there, some kind of impacts of climate change around the UK, around the world, and some images, some to do with the UK, some that could be applied to other parts of the world as well, to give you some ideas of things you can write. Now remember, just some of these photos might show different particular parts of the world. That doesn't mean they're exclusive to these areas. There's a few pictures here that link to the UK, but just because we see these problems in the UK, that doesn't mean they're not other places as well. So don't just rely on these visual cues, but they hopefully will give you some ideas to get you going. So again, pause, try and complete as much as you can. When you're ready to do so, unpause and continue on to the next bit. So this now leads us into the teacher support section. So I'm going to go through some key ideas now that should get you to help build up your any other final gaps that you have, and also just any extra ideas you want to include on your work. So when we're talking about global impacts, then you can see again this map we saw before shows a variety of different impacts we can see around the world when it comes to climate change. Sea level rise, extreme weather events, more droughts, coastal erosion, all these things and a few others, okay, that you know about. You can also see this diagram on the left here, which shows kind of some of the expected problems we might see in LIDCs and ACs, okay, with certain amounts of global increase in temperatures. So have a look through those things and look at some of those impacts. Can you think of any examples that you've seen of these, okay, that you can apply? So for example, we can see on the ecosystems one at the bottom, it says more species face extinction. For example, polar bears. Now in our last session we talked about the fact that obviously Arctic ice is reducing. That's where a lot of the polar bears spend a lot of the time. It's getting a lot harder for polar bears to hunt for their food in Arctic areas. So you can understand how those knock-on impacts are going to continue to happen. So that's what you want to try and do. Try and make those links to those different places as you go through. Now, one thing I need to get across really clearly before we go any further in this topic. In all our topics we do, we talk about a case study, a particular place or event that we study in detail. Now, technically, there isn't a case study within this topic for changing climates. However, it's expected, because climate change is a global issue, we want to bring in global examples to be able to show that we understand that why climate change isn't just one particular place or a problem for one group of people. It's a global issue. Many people around the world are affected, different areas and different reasons. So even though there isn't a case study exactly that is, but what we should be doing and what the examiner is going to be expecting us to do is bring in examples of places and events that help back up our ideas when it comes to talking about the impacts of climate change. So as we go through, you want to be making sure that you're noting down these examples. Don't just rely on my examples as well. look in the news, look through lots of the articles that are on about climate change all over the internet, okay, all over the television, okay. So use them as well to help you build up your understanding of this issue. Don't just rely on a couple of key ideas. So as we go through these as well, we also want to try and make sure we're picking out these 3 key things. Remember, we always see in geography social, environmental and economic. We want to think about, every time we talk about these different impacts, we want to see what are the social impacts, what are the environmental impacts, what are the economic impacts. Remember, we do this when we look at sustainability too, especially in sustaining ecosystems, also on paper 1. We want to break it down to these 3 things. The more we talk about them, the more explicit we are to talk about them, it shows better geography understanding. So as you're going through these slides, making sure that you try and break up these impacts. Right, which of these impacts are social, which of these are environmental, etc. Can you link each impact to all 3 of these things? That's the real challenge here. So really try and do that. So first impact then, sea level rise due to thermal expansion and ice melt. We know ice is melting in Arctic regions and glaciers around the world, and yes, this contributes to more less ice on the Earth's surface and more adding to the water in the oceans. However, it's actually the fact that the oceans are warming which is causing a lot of the sea levels rise to take place. This thermal expansion, remember, as water gets hotter, its particles get bigger, which causes the sea levels to rise. At the bottom there you can see that in the last 100 years, global mean sea level has risen by 17 centimetres. Now that's not 17 centimetres everywhere. Some places see higher expansion, higher rise than others, but as an average, that's what we've seen. Now, obviously, we know that's a big impact on the UK. You can see from the map there that a projected map of the UK maybe in 100 years, if temperatures carry on increasing as they do, lots of places around the UK will be flooded, especially you can see along the east coast. Now, we always talk about the Norfolk coastline in our distinctive landscapes topic. So again, we can make links to that we already know. But also think about on a more global scale, places like Florida in the USA, real risk, okay, of sea level rise. Places like Miami are having to adapt their roads and things like that just to cope because water keeps getting higher and higher in those places. And then other smaller places like Tuvalu, which we'll touch upon later, and places like the Maldives, really popular tourist destination, really suffering due to sea level rise. In fact, Maldives could be gone in the next kind of 20 to 30 years. Okay, it's about the highest point of the island is about 6 foot, about the height of me. So there's every chance that we could lose it. So again, sea level rise, big global impact. Increased extreme weather events such as hurricanes and storms. Now, we've seen this again in the UK, in over kind of Christmas time in 2019, from November, December, January and February. Really wet conditions, lots of flooding due to extreme amounts of rainfall. But we know in other parts of the world that it's not just extreme amounts of rainfall, but it's the hurricanes, the tropical storms that come with it. Warmer oceans are leading to more extreme, more category 5 tropical storms. So this is a part where we need to be able to link the fact that, is there a correlation between more hurricanes and climate change? Well, yeah, because we can see the increase in global ocean temperatures, more areas are at risk of tropical storms, and the strength of these tropical storms are getting stronger and stronger because the oceans are warmer. Now, one of the most famous ones in history is Hurricane Katrina that hit in the USA in 2005. Caused massive flooding and problems in the southern parts of America, one of the most expensive natural disasters of all time. Now, America has been hit with other natural disasters in more recent years as well. But we also know about tropical storms like Typhoon Haiyan that we studied in Global Hazards topic. Remember, Typhoon Haiyan was one of the most powerful typhoons ever to hit land. So again, the strength and the frequency of these storms is becoming more and more likely. So again, good global example to talk about. Obviously, we've just mentioned about the more storms. This is obviously going to lead to also greater risk of frequency of floods as well in rivers. As we get more rainfall, we're going to get more floods. So when we get those extreme weathers, we can lead to that. Now again, we've seen floods in the UK in the last year, in 2019, towards the end of 2019. But also think about places like India and Bangladesh that suffer from flooding, places like rivers like the Ganges, severe flooding. In the last decade, 700,000 Bangladeshis have been displaced because of natural disasters, and a lot of that in Bangladesh comes down to flooding. Water coming down from the Himalayas, okay, and also monsoon rains that can hit, and these are becoming more unpredictable as well, which again can lead to great amounts of flooding in those places. So again, another good global example, but we could also link to the UK as well. Coastal erosion. Again, we link back to our North Norfolk coastline. If you remember, 1 to 2 metres of land is eroded every year along the North Norfolk coastline because of its soft sediment. But again, this isn't just exclusive to the UK. Other areas of the world can suffer it too. Okay, places like off the coast of America. So coastal erosion again is another issue. With higher sea levels, we get higher tides, we're getting more extreme storms, so leading to greater erosion, more force to the water getting close to the cliffs and wearing them away. So again, try and look for some more global examples of that to support, but again, it's another good UK example as well. Longer and more severe droughts. Again, when we talk about droughts, a lot of the time we associate it with places in Africa. Now, one of the most common areas that we see this then is the place called the Sahel, which is a region just below, like a strip that goes all the way below the Saharan desert. Lots of those places are real risk. It's where the land is very semi-arid. Okay, so it's not quite completely dry, but what's happening is because we're seeing more extreme weather, more areas with time without rainfall, we're seeing more extreme droughts happening in these areas, causing for the loss of vegetation, so there's an environmental impact there, but also it means lots of farming. People who do farming in those areas are losing out on food because their crops are dying because of the really dry conditions. In 2010, a famine struck the Sahel. In Niger, crops failed to mature in the heat, and a famine occurred. 350,000 people faced starvation because of a lack of food. Now, we've also talked about droughts as well in the UK. Those have been 2012. And even this year, again, as we're talking now, it's been really dry over the last few months at the beginning of 2020, from kind of March to May. So gone from one extreme of the floods over Christmas to really dry conditions. So, you know, these droughts are not just global, but can also affect the UK as well. Now, we meant link earlier then. Now, as I said, there isn't a case study in this topic, but a good place to be able to talk about that has been massively impacted by climate change is Tuvalu. It's home to around 10,000 people, so it's quite a small island. Okay, English is the first language and Christianity the main religion. Now, they mainly survive on fishing as their kind of thing. There is some kind of tourist aspect as well, with 2,000 tourists coming every year. But Tuvalu is a very low-lying country. I think the highest point in the island is around 2 meters above sea level. Maybe one particular point, maybe 10, but again, generally very low. So it's a real risk of being lost. People, locals talk about the ideas of with the tides coming higher and higher. And one of the big issues facing people in Tuvalu is farming. Now, what they've had to do is they've had to change the type of plants they grow, because as the sea levels have risen and tides come in, the salt water is mixed with the fresh water on the island, and it's caused there to be what we call salination. So basically more salt content in the water, which is making it hard for the people but also to grow crops, because crops are dying on the island because of the salt water interfering. So they've had to start to work with more salt resistant crops to cope with that. Now, this is all because they are suffering because of sea level rise. Now, Tuvaluan people aren't necessarily causing climate change with their day-to-day life. However, it's the actions of us in places like the UK or in the USA, or in a lot of our industrialised countries, that are leading to this kind of enhanced greenhouse effect that is then having a detrimental effect on small islands and places like Tuvalu. So even though they aren't contributing to climate change, they are some of the biggest sufferers of it. So again, it becomes a global issue because it doesn't just affect you and me, it affects people in other places. So again, we need to keep considering this as we're going through. So finally then, we'll just talk about a few ideas about the impacts of climate change within the UK. We've made some links to them already, but let's just pick out a few more, and I'm going to do this a little bit shorter. So temperature changes we mentioned quite a bit. Now obviously temperature changes can be good because it might make it warmer conditions, which we might see as a good thing for the UK, might attract more tourists. So there is some positives there as well, but also we know it got more kind of people dying from heat related illnesses with heat waves and things like that. So it can cause a mixture of different things. More storms and floods we've talked about quite a lot, and again we have seen an increase of that in the 2000s. This is another example of floods in 2013, 2014, but obviously we could link to more recent floods in 2019 as well. So again, this is becoming more of an issue. We've mentioned again also about sea level rise. 15 million people in the UK live around the coast. And with sea level rise, that's going to lead to more issues around coastal flooding, coastal erosion. Again, linking it to North Norfolk is a prime example here. You can see some examples of eroded cliffs. Wildlife. So a big concern is that if the UK's temperatures rise by 2 degrees, 30% of plant and animal species will be at risk of becoming extinct. So this is a big problem. We've seen examples of wildfires in the past in the UK as well, destroying large areas of woodland. So we've seen examples of this in America as well, at a lot more extreme level, but it can be an issue. We've also got things like fish species such as Atlantic salmon and trout, which need cold water and may struggle to survive if the ocean waters get warmer around the UK. This could put a lot of fishermen out of business, and also cause lots of fish to migrate. So lots of kind of social, economic, environmental impacts there we can link to. Agriculture is a big one. We know that obviously with more kind of things like drought happening in the UK, we're seeing a lot more farms suffer because they can't grow things properly. So crop yields start to decrease. So there's less food being produced, which can lead to an increase in food costs in the supermarkets. So these things are a big problem. And also transport. Extreme weather events can lead to blocks in roads, flooding along roads, which can stop people from being able to get to work and move around. And also we've even seen some extremes where heat waves cause surfaces to melt. So, and you can see here train lines being bent out of shape because of the extreme heat. So again, transport can be disrupted by some of the impacts of climate change and more extreme weather we're receiving in the UK. So to finish then, we've got some practice questions for us to look at, some big 6 and 8 markers here. So suggest why climate change is a global issue. Now remember, 6 marks, 2 peel paragraphs here. We want to be able to show why climate change is a global issue. So like I've done during this video by discussing lots of different places being affected, you can use those examples to back up your ideas to show, right, well, flooding is a problem caused by climate change, but it doesn't just affect the UK, it affects these places as well. So try and bring those examples in when you're discussing this. Use your peel structure. One of the impacts of climate change is this. This has caused problems in this place, but also in this place. This shows that it's not just affecting one place, it shows that it's affecting a variety of places. You could say the fact that people in the UK contribute to climate change through fossil fuel emissions and things like that, but also global emissions is also contributing to sea level rise, which is then also impacting on small islands that maybe not necessarily contribute to climate change, but are suffering because of it. That's also showing it's a global issue. So there's different ways you can go about that question. But again, bug your answer, peel structure. Bit of a tougher one. Assess whether the social impacts of climate change experienced in the UK in the 21st century are greater than the environmental ones. So remember, social means impacts on people. Environmental impacts, think of on animals, plants, etc. Now we mentioned about impacts of wildlife a few slides ago, so you could bring in some impacts there, but also you then need to be able to think about, right, how are we going to be impacted as people? So you might want to pick out a variety of different impacts on the UK and show what the social, what are the environmental impacts. But because the question says assess, in each peel paragraph you need to be stating whether you think the social impact is greater or the environmental impact is greater. You've got to kind of basically weigh it up and make a decision here. Remember, it doesn't matter which direction you go in, whether you think it's the social and environmental, The point is that you're showing the examiner that you're evaluating by saying which one is greater. So don't put too much pressure on yourself to say, what if I get it wrong? What if it's the social impacts are greater than the environmental? Or the environment, that doesn't matter. It's about your argument, making sure you're clearly stating which impact is greater and your reasoning why. That's what's important here. So it's an 8-mark question, so you should be doing at least 2 PL paragraphs and a conclusion. If you can, try and do 3 PL paragraphs and the conclusion. Again, link it to examples, get some key facts in there, show that you really know this issue. So have a look at this work. If you've got any questions, please contact me, okay? And I'll see you soon. Goodbye.